So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kim T. Ha. I'm director of the Pennington Public Library. And welcome to our talk with author William J. Lewis of New Jersey's Lost Piney Culture. We will have a Q&A afterward, so if you have any questions during the program, you can write them into the Q&A section. And other comments may also be placed into the chat window, and we will relay them to William at the end of the program. I'm sure we'll have a very fruitful discussion. A little bit about our speaker today. William J. Lewis is a lifetime resident of the New Jersey Pine Barrens, as were multiple generations of his family before him. He shares his piney adventures on social media networks under Piney Tribe, and he preaches exploration without exploitation and to teach our children to be tomorrow's environmental stewards. After proudly serving as a U.S. Marine, William went on to graduate from Rider University. He founded an environmental nonprofit to get kids outdoors and has served in leadership roles for both governmental and New Jersey nonprofit organizations. His travel mileage stretches across the globe from many locations in the United States to the Horn of Africa, which has helped in enriching his perspective of our New Jersey Pine Barrens. Welcome, William. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited to have you today.
Hello, everybody. How you doing? All right. Well, evening, everybody. And thank you, Kim. I'm going to clap here, so I hope everybody else claps at home. But the Pennington Library, a public library, small but strong, bringing this type of much-needed programming to people who, after the last couple of years that we've had, this is to me a great service to the community, and being able to open it up to even a larger community that safely at home. I think that deserves a round of applause.
You're too kind, William.
And thank you, Kim. I appreciate it. Lots of planning in the background. So that being said, some of you that logged on might have saw my little pixelated image here for our Zoom, our virtual tour. I had a beard, so the image here is Beardless Bill, author of New Jersey's Lost Piney Culture. I travel a lot for work. I work for the federal government, and I teach a lot of different people new systems. I always start my presentations wherever I go with an image of my family. One, it serves as a reminder to the people who I'm there as an agent of change. Lots of people don't like change, so it lets them know that there's a family behind me and I'm here to do a job just like they're there to do a job. And two, hopefully at the end of the presentation, even if I bored you to death, you won't throw tomatoes at me. So I hope that works on you guys too. But so my lovely wife is on the right side of the screen there, Christina. To her right is my oldest daughter, Danelle. And then my youngest, it's to my right, and she's also the tallest of the house, Chloe. And that's my lovely family there. So New Jersey's Lost Piney Culture. Usually the number one question people ask me, this book was released in January of this year, and I fielded this question numerous times about why would you write a book about Pineys and Piney culture? And does that mean that you're a Piney, or are you a Piney expert? So a funny short story to go along with the answer to that question. My wife and I were driving up to upstate New York. My oldest daughter there, Chloe, pitches for University at Albany, and she was graduating a year early, and she will be going on to her master's later on in the beginning of this year. But so we were heading up the thruway, and I got a random phone call, and I was in the passenger seat. So I answered the call. It was from Quakertown, PA. And usually, if you're like me, you usually don't answer your cell phone because it's usually a telemarketer wanting to check up on your car warranty, right? And I don't want my car warranty extended. But I did this time, and a woman gets on the phone, and she says, "Are you a real life Piney?" And I was like taken aback by that question. Like, is this a crank call? Like, what's going on here? I said, I'm not sure. And then I must have been on speakerphone. So then the gentleman got on the phone and said, we were just we were trying to tell our friends that Pineys exist and that you're not a fable. And we went online and we pulled up, we typed in the word Piney and Piney Tribe popped up, and we went to your Facebook page and we was like, see, there's proof that there's Pineys, and we just wanted to know we're not crank calling you or nothing, but we were interested in Pineys and Piney folklore. And I said, well, I mean, I wrote a book about Piney, so I guess I'm a Piney. Um, and if you want more information, I can send it to you, and you can go ahead and pick up the book in New Jersey's Lost Piney Culture. Well, sure enough, they as I was driving, I sent them the information via text message, and I heard a cha-ching in the background. And if you guys know anything about Venmo, Venmo is electronic payment. That cha-ching was letting me know that somebody paid me a certain amount of money, and I went ahead the next day and sent them a book. So they asked me if I was a Piney and if they existed. I said, sure they do. And that same question was actually came to my mind 2 years previously to that encounter this year. In March 20th, 2018, I was on a work trip to Jacksonville, Florida. I flew in on a Sunday and we started work on a Monday. So that Sunday afternoon, I was free and lots of downtime there. I drove from the Orlando airport out to the Gainesville, Florida. That's a Northwest Pass, probably 3 or 4 hour drive. But I went out there because I'm a birder. I don't know how many people in the audience are bird watchers at home, but there was a bird there that was causing quite a stir, and it was also on my life list, and I had never seen one before, a snail kite, which is pictured here. So I drove out to Sweetwater, the name of the park in Gainesville, Florida, and it was pretty easy to find the bird because there was 2 other people watching the bird at the park. So I walked out and stood alongside them with my binoculars and my camera, taking pictures and enjoying the bird. And then as the sun was setting, because it took me a while to get there in the afternoon, but I did enjoy actually getting the bird and striking it off my list. We were walking back, and a couple introduced themselves and said, we're from Indiana. I said, oh, I'm from New Jersey. And then the gentleman said, you're from New Jersey? Have you ever heard of the Pine Barrens? And I was like, in my side of my head, I was thinking, a gentleman from Indiana wants to know if I know about the Pine Barrens. Why does he know about the Pine Barrens of New Jersey? I said, sure, I know about the Pine Barrens. I grew up in the area. I'm from Browns Mills, Chatsworth when I was little. Spent the summers there with my grandparents, and we lived in the Pines pretty much all my life. He's like, oh, really? And he was really excited. He's like, you're really from the Pine Barrens. Have you ever heard of this book, The Pine Barrens, written by John McPhee? That's the reason why this was on my bucket list, and I had to go to the New Jersey Pine Barrens because I read that book. And at the time in 2018, I had not heard about the book or read the book. So I guess to my own detrimental, I should have, I guess, because I'm from the area maybe, but I did not. Excuse me. But that encounter, we left the park, and actually that week, there's a great used bookstore in town, and I picked up the book while I was down there on work. And I finished that book within about a week. It's a very quick read. The Pine Barrens put out in the 1968, I think it is. So it's been out there a long time. And through the last couple of years, I kind of come to the opinion that that book preserved and was the catalyst to getting us a Pinelands National Reserve. That 1.1 million acres that's in the Pine Barrens, that's 20% of the acreage in New Jersey. So it's a very large swath, and it's very unique as far as being it's a World Heritage Site, so people from around the world go there. But at the time, when I spoke to this gentleman from Indiana, I just, I didn't, it's the Pine Barrens. I guess, I grew up there, went to different events there. But when I left as a young Marine joining the military, I kind of never took a second thought to where I came from and kind of left that behind, that part of my life, as I started my career with the Marine Corps. And then when I came back from the Marine Corps, actually starting a family, and I was full tilt, trying to support a family, being a young dad. So I never gave the Pine Barrens too much thought. But this encounter is the reason why I wrote the book, because after reading John McPhee's book, I thought to myself, somebody from the Pine Barrens, a little bit more authenticity, should have wrote that book, because they would have known things that I knew from firsthand experience that John McPhee didn't cover in his book. And then there were some things that he did cover, and I thought that he painted the people of the pines, those Pineys, in a negative light. And up until that point, that was the first time I was ever introduced to the word piney being a derogatory term. I did not ever be called piney when I was young. I don't remember anybody ever saying my parents were Pineys, grandparents, or anything like that. And I didn't know there was a negative. The only thing I really knew about Pineys was my grandmother loved having a bumper sticker on every car that she purchased that said, "I'm proud to be a Piney from my nose down to my hiney." So that really got me to thinking, very naively, I should write the book that from the stories and experiences I have and set the record straight. Um, and John McPhee's book is a national bestseller, so that's very naive of me. You could say it's very cocky of me, but I went on to start the book project in 2018. So here we are, 2021, talking about the book, New Jersey's Lost Piney Culture. That snail kite, for you guys that are curious about why he was so far northwest, when usually snail kites are seen farther in the Everglades, many hours farther drive south. They were up there. Only one snail kite was there, because there's an invasive island apple snail that's actually growing and expanding its range. It's an invasive, so it's not native, which is usually a bad thing with invasives. But the snail kite was there to take advantage of that, which snail kites eat snails, these apple snails. And there's one in his talon right there. Photo I took that day when I met that great couple from Indiana. I just wish I wrote down their names, because I did not write down their names, and they are the reason why I wrote the book. So that negative part of the word piney, right? And why is it such a negative? And what's the history of that? So the first couple of chapters of the book are pretty. When I wrote it, and I had advanced readers feedback. One of them was that the couple of chapters are very dark history, and do you want to cut some of that out? I don't think you can appreciate your history today without knowing the history of the past. And that's just my personal philosophy. So when I was writing the book, I had to understand why the word piney was really like the N word is today. It was very derogatory. And why was that? And who promoted that? Because to me, if I was a piney and my grandparents and my family are pineys and people I knew and everything that I experienced growing up, they were typical pineys, why I didn't experience any negative. I didn't see no bad things. So why was the word so bad? And why was it thrown around in certain circles in hushed tones? So there was a source in one of the research books that I was reading that's quoted that one of the New Jersey governors actually went to the Pine Barrens, and he had some really bad things to say about the people of the Pines. And it was national news. So I had to locate that newspaper, which I did. So in my office, I have a tome of 1913 of the articles in June that were published by Boston Transcript. So the article on Saturday, June 28th, 1913, not that long ago, the headline news on a Saturday newspaper was New Jersey degenerates, terrible conditions found by Governor Fielder among the Pineys, segregation and sterilization advocated. I just saying those words out loud, and when I actually got the newspaper in the mail, and after I had purchased from an antique dealer, and I read that, it just makes my hair on my arm stand up. Very chilling that somebody at such a high level in office was talking about a subset of New Jersey population and using words like segregation and sterilization. And I really, in the very beginning, I mean, one, it still makes me mad to hear that. Two, I'm just dumbfounded that that was something that occurred in New Jersey. So the first couple of chapters in the New Jersey Lost Piney Culture it puts it out there for you, lets you know the research, who started that, who was Dr. Goddard, Elizabeth Kite. They were key people in promoting and documenting that stereotype. And the governor just ran with it and won re-election in 1913. He was actually filling a position by the ex-governor, if anybody remembers in their history books, Governor Wilson. He went on to be president and vacated the position, and Governor Fielder was the next person. And Governor Fielder won re-election on this platform issue of New Jersey degenerates and him saving New Jersey from the Pineys. So in John McPhee's book, he mentions a gentleman named Bill Wasowicz. Now, Bill still lives today. He's 83 years old. The picture on the right is of me and my nephew, Shane, and we visited him at his home. The picture on the left is from a good friend of mine and author, Dennis McDonald, from 1982. And Dennis he's a great resource as far as documenting history from the past and when it was actually pretty much unheard of. People didn't understand what Pineys were then. People don't understand what Pineys are today. So Bill Wasowicz, if John McPhee said he was a Piney, I had to define for myself what exactly is that, because from a little bit that I knew and read about Bill Wasowicz and the Pine Barrens, the book by John McPhee, I knew that he didn't grow up in the Pine Barrens. He was from North Jersey, moved to the Pine Barrens, loved to hunt, and he started doing some typical Piney things like living very close to the land, hunting, fishing, and also collecting pine cones and sphagnum moss. And these are two of the items of the Richardson calendar. There's 101 items in the dry floral industry, an industry that lasted until the 1990s. But these are typical things that I would say are classic definition of what a Piney was back then. So from Bill Wasowicz, right, trying to define what a classic Piney is, and then tackling that bigger question, is that word Piney what the definition of it is today? Is it still a bad word? And there's a chapter in the book named Is Piney Still a Bad Word? And this is an image from the Barnes and Nobles in Brick. And they had my book out there and on display. A friend of mine, Jen Collier, snapped this photo and posted it to Facebook and said, "Hey, look, I know a famous author." Well, another person who's part of the Piney Tribe and also one of Jen's friends, she commented below, and I'll read it to you. It might be small print, but I'll read it out loud to you because it's a very impactful statement. So she was saying about this image, the negativity of shark attacks and the mob, which are the two books to the right of my book, dead center there. She said, next to a book with the term Pineys in the title, a term which is so misunderstood with many negative and false urban legends of their own. Avoid subconscious marketing connections for those who may have the misconceptions and are quick glancing, if that makes sense. This book is everything opposite these misconceptions. So the book I wrote, New Jersey's Lost Piney Culture, is opposite of those misconceptions. And as she says, does an amazing job of giving life to people and a place by telling their story. And that just was just this year. So there's many people like her out there that still say that people use the word Piney in a derogatory way. And I can only say that, there was some false science by a report put out about a false Piney family, the Calyx, from Dr. Goddard and Elizabeth Kite back in the day, that was promoted at the highest level in our government and instituted systematically by Governor Fielder, to which today contributes to that word still being and lingering out there in certain circles as a negative. But it's not all negative. Today, the book's not all about, dark history, but you have to understand history in order to understand the present and your future, right? If you're history buffs, you know this to be a fact. And that's why you love history so much. So I met Gina, the woman on the right here in this photo, and Ken at a book signing in Medford. I was at a local brewery in Medford, and I did a book signing there. And they came in and they were talking about the book and about their experiences. And they hadn't fully read the book then, only that they got it and they came in for an autograph. But they loved it. So they are quintessential two different types of pineys that I highlight and define as what is a piney today. Well, there's 10 types of pineys today. The pineys of old, very similar to Americans. The Americans that were born and lived in the 30s and 40s, they were different than the future generations, the 50s and 60s, the 70s and 80s, and so on. There are different types of Americans. Somebody that lives on the left coast versus the right coast, they are different types of Americans today. The same thing can be said for pineys. So I've taken a lot of time and effort to outline and define the 10 types of pineys that exist today. And I'm also working currently on a project, a 1-hour documentary that loosely follows some of the main themes of the book. And we're in the final shooting phases and editing of some of the film. We've got a couple more scenes, but so the premiere of that, this is a 7-minute video I'd like for you guys to watch, and then we'll pick up after Gina and Ken finish talking. But this is a 7-minute clip that's part of that 1-hour movie. So I'm going to start this real quick. So don't go nowhere. You don't want to miss this. This is the meat and potatoes of the presentation.
I'm Gina.
My name's Ken.
And we're here because of the book that brought us together, helped us understand our differences. And this book, New Jersey's Lost Piney Culture, by William J. Lewis, talks about the different types of pineys that there are in our area here. One of the first times that I met Ken, he was fishing and he was all dressed in camo, and I thought to myself, why is he in a uniform and fishing, looking like he needs to be hunting? And so I asked him, and from that day on, we've been together for 15 years, and we are very different people. In the story where we looked at different types of pineys, and I most identify with the tree-hugging piney, the kind of person who is a transient. I came from Long Island originally, and I never went back. And Ken grew up in
Turnersville, South Jersey. Always been in South Jersey.
And now lives in Chatsworth. So he's part of the hunting, fishing culture. And I came to school here in 1977, and I've been here ever since. And 15 years ago we met, and we're still together today.
The hunter piney, many a shotgun-toting young man, came to the Jersey Pines to hunt game animals like ducks, deer, foxes, and bobwhite quail. They established hunting clubs and had hunting cabins in their territories and came down and stayed during the hunting season. The love of the land eventually gets a strong hold on many of these outsiders and turns them into insiders and year-round residents. Not to be confused with a woods piney. Many of these hunters adopted their work to support their love of hunting, with some even becoming pine cone pickers. Note author John Stinton in the book Pineland's Folk Life first described in general terms someone who decided to stay in the pines, those who could live within the seasonal rhythms of the place.
The tree hugger piney. Someone who takes a photo of Lake Apsigami and captures the pristine landscape and never wants to see it altered, just like a snapshot in time. Today, we call them environmentalists and conservationists. Many flock to the area and continue to do so, seeking glimpses of the unique flora and fauna. Possibly without their help, we wouldn't have the pines we have today.
The company Piney, a leftover family in the Jersey Pines that worked for generations from one bust industry to another. Later, the local workforce was stabilized by farming, Both the owner of small and large farms and their loyal employees who worked the land are included here. Prime examples are the Ocean Spray folks who lived and died as company men. We're sure they did well for themselves and mean no negative connotations. Like the highly adaptive pine tree that makes up the Pine Barrens, it suffers fire and is reborn and survives to regrow. The company Piney has learned to do the same.
The educated Piney. Those natives who were well off enough and had the smarts it took to go off to college. Sometimes they came back and stayed in the Jersey Pines. And lots of times they just visited.
The Conway Twitty Piney. Conway Twitty was Granny Lewis's favorite guitar player. At White's Bog Blueberry festivals, she always liked the country and bluegrass bands, and as far as she was concerned, any person who could strum an instrument or carry a tune who lived in the Jersey Pines was a Twitty Piney.
The out-of-town Piney with boat slip. Lots of folks who are rich enough to have a second home located in the Jersey Pines tend to have money for a boat as well. Whether you like it or not, we all came to the area at one time or another. The closeness to Philly and New York has had a major influence in shaping the area. A few of us are proud to wear the title of Piney, just like the rest of us, and the rest of us welcome them to do it.
The firefighter Piney. Fire and the pines go together like peanut butter and jelly, and the same could be said about the South Jersey firefighter. Whether fighting for wildfires year-round, protecting their neighbors, or fighting fire in their own backyards, their sense of service to the region is admirable. This was not always a full-time paying job, but it is a full-time work when a fire catches. The volunteer firemen and the fire stations supporting them become 24-hour fixtures of the Piney landscape.
The patriotic Piney. The New Jersey Pines has a large chunk of it contained behind big governmental fences, where thousands of men and women are trained to be in the armed forces. A lot of those folks who came to the area from around the United States retired in New Jersey, happy and content to live in their adopted state, finding solace in the open space and the many opportunities to fish, trap, and hunt in the pines.
This type was never really described by Granny Lewis, so the author here is injecting his interpretation to describe Granny herself. Poor enough to afford a tub of lard and a loaf of white bread, this Piney would make hard sandwiches for lunch. The woods Piney depended on the woods to provide the family with a wage to live by. Whether the men ran beat-up pickup trucks to the woods looking for scrap junk cars or hauling a load of pine cones from the plains, you betcha they didn't care what you called them. With fried snapper meat from snapping turtles caught fresh out of the flowering creeks, or deer shot year-round and to keep the fridge full, the Piney did what he could to get by. There are many reasons for the word reluctant to be used to describe these Pineys. As the times were changing and full-time employment took them out of the woods, they were reluctant to go, but progress crawled up to them. They were reluctant to leave the generations of woods work, but now they had to adapt or become extinct.
So 10 types of pines, right? So, and they did a great job of reading the definitions from the book, actually quotes from the book. So that Piney Tribe, those 10 types make up the Piney Tribe of today. It's not just when somebody randomly called me from Quakertown, PA and wanted to know if the Pineys existed still today. I've doing the research and working on this book project, Pineys came out of the woodwork. People love the New Jersey Pine Barrens. People necessarily aren't from the Pine Barrens, and they love it just as much as somebody that was born there and lived there for 6-7 generations.
I'm Gina.
Sorry about that. They and that group of people. So on this slide here, that group of people that make up the Piney Tribe, right? As I'm working and interviewing different people for different segments of the book, New Jersey's Lost Piney Culture, it is a general theme about the people that I was collecting and coming around me. They were like Lewis and Clark types. They interacted with the Pine Barrens in their own way, and their own, I guess, subject matter experts in the things that they did in the Pine Barrens, and made them truly 21st century explorers of the Pine Barrens. Whether they be, award-winning photographers like Albert Horner, or a gentleman from Pennsylvania who comes and races dirt bikes, Euro races that go through there, or a young group of kids, bottom left picture of a young group of girls, adult women who go to the Pine Barrens after work, and they just go and drive the dirt roads just to release and hang out and have fun. But you can see from this, it's not stereotypical. They're not royal, white, poor people that are part of the Pine Barrens today. They're a very diverse group of people from all walks of life. And the other thing with that makes that magical place, the Pine Barrens, and something that we'd want to, put that big fence around and preserve 1.1 million acres, is the people of the pines are very important. You can't separate them from the land, but you can't separate the land from the people either. And these are just some images that I've taken over the last couple of years during research. I kind of got the botany bug. I was out there documenting Piney Craft plants, and these other plants they draw thousands of people to the Pine Barrens just to get a glimpse of some of these plants. Some of them are endangered. The curly fern, top left corner, that is an endangered species of the Pine Barrens. Some of them are specific to the pines. And then there's other plants that they've either marched up the East Coast and they end at the Pine Barrens, going no further north, or they've marched down from Maine all the way to New Jersey, and they end at New Jersey and don't go no further south. So the Pine Barrens is a very magical place because of the meeting of those two different types of plants that come to the area. And then you got the culture and the history that's both past and present. But when we talk about why I was out there documenting for the book, is we're talking about the Richardson calendar, the Piney Craft items that make up that calendar being January, February, March, April. What were the plants that the Piney families, the traditional families that we would call the woods piney of today, what did they actually go out and collect to make them being, when the historians from Congress were assigned to go document the culture and the history of the Pine Barrens before they became a preserve, they went and they interviewed people, and most people said people that went out in the pines and collected these plants, they were the traditional, typical type of Pineys. Those were the people that you should be interviewing. These items here are items that were sold to the dry floral industry all the way up until the 1990s. So it's the longest living industry, or at least witnessed by other people, industry that is not given the recognition that it deserves. When you talk about, give me an industry that's part of the Pine Barrens, people will say bog iron. Bog iron was collected from the streams and sent to furnaces, and they made the war material, the balls, for war during the Revolutionary War and stuff like that. Those came from that bog iron industry. Or maybe paper mills. Paper mills they made paper, and that was a big industry in the Pine Barrens, but a very short-lived industry. So those industries have been talked about and written about quite extensively, but nobody mentions the dry floral industry in the way that I've categorized it and laid it out in the New Jersey's Lost Piney culture. And that was something that was typical, what people would typically say would be part of the classic definition of what a piney is. Those people that went out and collected these items like birch poles, black plumes, which is a phragmite. If people know invasive species, this is an invasive plant. Black plumes equals phragmite. Cattails, grapevine, peppergrass, hoghuck. These different plants were part of that Richardson calendar. So what's the tie with the Richardson calendar? Who is Richardson, this calendar named after? And what's that have to do with the Mount Holly Fairgrounds? These images are from the 1922 Mount Holly Fairgrounds. Most people won't realize, but Mount Holly, one, it's outside of the Pine Barrens, so it's not in the Pine Barrens. So what are we talking about Mount Holly for, right? And two, the Mount Holly Fairgrounds, what was it? From 1856 to 1926, the Mount Holly Fairgrounds was a big deal. Sitting presidents went to the fairgrounds. It was one of the largest type of events in New Jersey. Governor Wilson, then President Wilson, he attended the Mount Holly Fairgrounds. They also, at the fairgrounds, your typical fair with food, drink, prizes, games for the family, but they also had a huge horse race track, and they did harness races there. And back then, they bet on horse races just like they do today. But so what's the tie with the Mount Holly Fairgrounds? I still haven't gotten there yet, but what's the tie with that in the Piney? So John Richardson, who's the person that we named the Richardson calendar after, John Richardson, he's featured here on the left in Mount Holly. He's on Pine Street there with his nephews, out on Trigger, which is the name of the horse there. He's a titan of the dry floral industry. He purchased in 1932 the business from his mother, who ran it out of the back of their house on Pine Street, Mount Holly. In 1945, so 32 to 45, he was able to make enough money to where he actually purchased the Mount Holly Fairgrounds. Up until then, if you go back, the heyday of the Mount Holly Fairgrounds lasted until 1926. So from 1926 to 1945, the fairgrounds was not maintained. Locals actually repurposed wood from the huge grandstands that were there. That when John Richardson purchased the property in 1945, there were no grandstands at the location, and then there was fires and other things that happened at the location. Even the horse race track was repurposed, and people, the local schools practiced football out there, or there was cars that raced around the track at one time. That was in that period, 1926 and 1945. So John, being a very business acumen that he had, he purchased the Mount Holly Fairgrounds in 45, and he went about reinstating the horse races there. At the same time, he utilized the cash inflow that he had from working with Pineys and paying Pineys for those dry floral items. He collected those items while he owned the Mount Holly Fairgrounds, and those items went to the big cities, and it fueled his business, his business enterprise, and his love of harness racing, to be able to put the track back in operation. And it was legal to bet on the horses on Sundays there weekly from 1945 to 1955. But the dry floral industry was still flourishing and supporting those hundreds of Piney families that used that as much needed income, because they didn't have normal 9 to 5 jobs. They worked close to the land, and by going out in the woods and collecting these 101 items of the Richardson calendar and selling them to John. That picture on the right from 1955, the horse track, if you can imagine it, in that time, cattails was a big item that John sold. He sold to the big cities, so he would purchase a load of cattails from the Pineys, who would go to Mount Holly and drop them off. He would then spread them out in the middle of the track so that they would dry and be ready for a dry floral arrangement. So he would dry them in the middle of the track and then collect them, load them, and then deliver them to Philadelphia or New York City. So in the 1930s, 1940s, 50s, in that time frame, if you were on Wall Street and you looked at the big windowscapes of the businesses there, and you looked at the decorations in the windows, they were dry floral items. And those items came from the Pine Barrens. They came from John Richardson, who purchased them from the Pineys, the local Pineys. So that was a huge industry that supported all those families. And without it, they wouldn't have been able to subsistence living, or living off the grid, as we call it today. They wouldn't be able to do that. And he was the titan of that industry. There are several other people that were proprietors, but nobody expanded the market and was so long-lived in the industry. Literally, when he died in the 1990s, the industry died with him. And that's how long of an example of an industry that lasted in the Pine Barrens, that was Piney families were taking these types of plants that grew photo from earlier, those different weeds, as some people call them, They were taken in the John Richardson all the way up to the 1990s, and he was selling them to florists and other people that were in that dry flower industry. So where does that bring us today? When we talk about history and remembering what the past was, what the present is, and where are we going to the future? This is an image the same as the one previous. I'll flip back real quick. If you picture the racetrack right there on the right, 1955, that was before they paved Paradise, and this is what it looks like today. The only last remnant of the Mount Holly Fairgrounds is the sign, Mount Holly Fairground Plaza, top left there in the image. They literally paved Paradise. In the 1955, that year was the on Wall Street was the biggest year. They've totally recouped at that time frame from the Great Depression. Everything was booming, and John took advantage of that. And when somebody approached him and looking to purchase the Mount Holly Fairgrounds from him, he sold it, and he made quite the penny by selling it, and he moved on somewhere else. But again, wherever if you're looking for history and just looking for it physically today to go places, it's hard to see something or a part of a story. And it's even harder to even remember part of the story unless somebody wrote it down. If somebody wrote about it and put it in a book, then that history will live on. But if I didn't write about the Mount Holly Fairgrounds and people read about it, they wouldn't know that that sign and the reasoning for that location to even be named the Mount Holly Fairgrounds and how important of a location it was for the local people in the state of New Jersey. So this brings us to, if Kim's still there, the question and answer section. This, just before I hand it back over to Kim, if you have any questions as far as concerns or about the book, or if I do other book signing events or anything like that, you can email me here, or I have a website, and I also do social media. I write quite a bit on Facebook on Piney Tribe. I got about 4,500 people there following along with short stories that share, as well as photos of the flora and fauna and of the people of the pines. So that I'm going to turn it back over to you, Kim.
Thank you so much, William. Your book was so enlightening to me, actually. And I wanted to ask you a few questions about it because there was so much in there. I mean, I moved here in 2012 from Maryland, so I'm constantly learning things about New Jersey. And I've heard rumors about Pineys, and it's amazing to me that this all originated from these studies from Dr. Goddard in 1913,
Right.
and that the stereotypes still persist to this day, to the point that as someone from Maryland who's come here, moved here much later in 2012, I've even heard of these stereotypes. And could you elaborate on, I guess it seemed like you lived in the Pineys, but you were unaware of what other people were saying until later on, and just if you could elaborate on your journey in researching this and finding out about Dr. Goddard. And I'm even uncertain when I read about Dr. Goddard and his studies, how this even happened, how this was perpetuated.
Yeah, so the book actually, I mean, it's almost coming to terms with me personally, my own personal journey to accept that I am a Piney and I'm very proud of that heritage, and using my talents as a writer to be able to say, here, grandmom, whoever's grandmom it is, here's the book, you've read it, now give it to your grandkids and show them why you're so proud of coming where you come from in your history, so that the chain of being shameful for that history, it gets instead of the tie to their personal history is no longer severed because they were shameful of it before. They're now proud of it, kind of like the bumper stickers, I'm proud to be a Piney. That's what grandma was teaching me when she had that bumper sticker on her car. So I didn't know it was a negative, and at the same time I wasn't listening to the lessons that my grandmother was teaching me. I just was living, right? And even across the nation, you know, there's groups of people that get picked on for whatever reasons. There's a little bit of difference. They're different. I mean, the Pine Barrens, right? 1.1 million acres. A lot of people only know the Pine Barrens from the highways that they drive through to get to the New Jersey shore, or they're going to from Pennsylvania to New York. They're cutting through and stuff like that. They don't know. They don't stop and get out of their car because of the stereotypes. They hear, you don't want to get out of the car, or the Pineys are going to get you. So to me, I wanted to just blow that out of the water, and I had to get to the roots of that, which was Dr. Goddard's study. It's hard for us to judge from our lens, our 21st century glasses that we have on, to what happened in the past. But Dr. Goddard went ahead and doctored photos of a woman, part of the Calyx story that he wrote about, saying that this Piney woman, she was from her stock. Her mother was a defective, and therefore she was a defective. So it was hereditary. It's kind of like the eugenics movement. It's just an early part of the eugenics movement, really. And he wrote about the Calyx family and how way up in the food chain of the family tree, this very upstanding man slept with a barmaid. The barmaid was a defective. So therefore, every child that barmaid had down the line were defectives. Well, he went ahead and married a proper woman, and the proper woman had children together, and all those children became upstanding citizens. They were presidents of universities, or they were very involved in local government, but they weren't the defectives from the barmaid. So that was the stereotype that they started with that study. And they literally had a woman locked up in a school for adults in Vineland. And her story is very tragic, so I don't want to go in too much into it, but she stayed into state institution all her life from the age 6. And if you read about her, and all this science has been debunked by other scientists, if you read about her, she was able to play music, she was able to sew, to make crafts. She wasn't very good at English and math, but she also took care of all the other younger kids that were part of that school of defectives or feeble-minded people. So she wasn't feeble-minded by today's standards. So when you look at that, you're thinking, this is a very evil and dark part of our life, and our history that started in New Jersey. That all his science actually got migrated over even and utilized at Ellis Island. So his science based off the Pineys was used against different races that came from overseas, and told them they failed this test and they weren't allowed to come into America. So that's how ugly that history is. And I try to, talk about the history of it and the ugliness of it. And at the same time, I want to give something to the future of, my family and the other families that are in the Pine Barrens. I want them to be proud of their heritage. None of that Dr. Goddard wrote about or Governor Fielder preached about and got re-election on that platform issue. None of that was true. And there's so much other things that they should be proud of. That knowledge of the plants. A lot of people today, botanists, love to go to the Pine Barrens and seek out certain plants. The knowledge that the Pine Barrens and the Pineys had of the Pine Barrens today would be, it's a high valued skill. People, when you say the name of certain plants, people look at you like you're a smart person. The Pineys knew plants, they just didn't know them by the Latin terms or the terms that other people knew by. So that's my answer to that question.
Thank you, William. I know it's a difficult topic. It's very shocking, but like you said, when you shed light on it, it really helps us to understand and to move forward, I think, and to reconcile that part of history. Patricia here mentions that the New Jersey State Library has some of these original reports available for study. And she says they're in the 901 collection there, in case anyone is interested. There's a person who's wondering about Olga. She's wondering about your family and how long has your family lived in the Pines?
So that's a great question, Olga. So lineage, right? Is that a determining factor to what a Piney is? I'll redirect that with a question, right? Is that how long you've been in a place? Does that make you more of a resident or a resident piney than somebody from Staten Island like Gina, who we heard from earlier, who spent, I think she said 40 or she spent a lot, most of her life in the Pine Barrens, but she was from Staten Island. So is somebody that's been there 5 or 6 generations in the Pine Barrens more of a piney than Gina was? I'll answer that with what I classically call a piney today. It's somebody that loves the land, topophilia, they call it. Somebody that loves the land, which is at 1.1 million acres with a big fence around it. They love the land, and they understand and respect the culture that is there already. And they can't see themselves being anywhere else. Maybe they're part-time and they only come in vacation, but they just love the aspect of everything that makes the Pine Barrens magical. Whether you're going on a road and the road can lead you to an old town that was part of bog iron industry, or it can lead you, the next turn can take you over here, and that was a paper mill industry. And all these industries were part of Americana. They were part of what made America America. Cranberries, blueberries, those industries that are so alive and thriving today. That to me, the essence of the Pine Barrens and people loving it that way, that makes them Pineys, even if they just got here 2 years ago. To me, that's a type of piney, as I outlined 10 different types of Pineys, right? But my own personal history, right? So, and I don't know, like very exact, so I'm not going to swear in court, but my grandmother was a Briton. So one of the folk tales is that the Britons were people that were loyal to the king. And if anybody knows the history of the Pine Barrens, lots of people that were loyal to the king, the Tories, went to the Pine Barrens to hide from persecution because America sided with being its own country and took up arms against the king, right? So loyalists weren't very popular. So they went and hid in the Pine Barrens after they lost. So my grandmother's a Briton, and then on my grandfather's a Lewis, and my other grandparents on my mom's side, they're Emerys and Hurleys and Grants, and they have history on Carr's Mills. Carr's Mills, another location in the Pine Barrens, they were people that did charcoal. They were also people that did cranberries and blueberries. So my family's spread all over the Pine Barrens. When you look at the family tree on both sides of my grandparents, but I don't feel like I'm home anywhere else. I've been all over the world, and when I see a pine tree in Hawaii on top of a mountain that I'm hiking, when I was a Marine in the 90s, and I see that pine tree, it instantly reminds me of home. And I couldn't really put a finger on it until this project, that I've noticed pine trees wherever I go. And those pitch pines of the Pine Barrens, I mean, if you're in the Pine Barrens, you know it's named because of the pines, right? It's because of those different types of pine trees. Wherever I've seen them, wherever I've traveled, Florida, it just reminds me of home. And there's other people that just move to the area and they fall in love with the area and they become that piney. So hopefully I answered your question, Olga.
That's a beautiful sentiment, William. And I really appreciate the definition of the Pineys and the cars that are associated with the Pineys.
Right.
I know I've been in New Jersey since 2012, but I feel like I'm part of New Jersey. So that's
right.
A very welcoming perspective. I really appreciate it. I have a question about John Richardson. You devote a good portion of your book to John Richardson and the dried floral industry. Could you talk more about this industry a little bit? Because it never occurred to me that this industry existed. I guess I'm just so used to the modern decor today with the silk flowers and the artificial plants that it never occurred to me that there was something before that.
Yeah, so I mean, humans have always decorated their homes with some sort of plants. It goes back to the Stone Ages, where the scientists have found plants alongside of human developments, right? The Romans, they had certain plants that they used to actually make head crowns. The crowns were not made out of steel or gold. They were made out of certain plants, olive branches and stuff like that. But there are certain types of plants they use for certain occasions. So it went from that to then migrating on to doors, and we have the common day wreath. and wreaths are put on doors, right? So that man's love for that, and bringing the plants from outdoors indoors has always been there since we've been men and women. So the industry in America, though, kind of follows suit naturally with the plants that we see in the dry flower industry. Those 101 items are also part of the Native American use of a lot of those plants for either nutritional value or medicinal. If you think about when I mentioned cattails is an item that Native Americans ate the roots. You can eat the heads of the plant, the brown part, which is actually can be made into a flower. Those type of plants have been on our lexicon for ages before they became part of a dry floral industry. And they were very common. People knew them. The early Europeans had to be introduced to them by local Native Americans, right? And there was a famous doctor in the Pine Barrens called Dr. Still, African American. He was a doctor, and he used those medicinal plants to then dish out medicinal solutions to people's whatever was ails them. But then it migrated to, and like I say, with Mr. Richardson's time, and even before his time, he got a business in 1930s. His parents were doing it, but before that, early when America was doing the holidays, Christmas was a big deal. Evergreen, laurel ropes, different things that you decorate your home around the holiday. That when we were early Judeo-Christian Christmas time, those were coming from around us. From people would go out and collect them. It just morphed into an industry in the Pine Barrens and something that sustained so many different families because of entrepreneurs like John Richardson, who expanded it from just a traditional Christmas trade to a year-round decorating. And people loved it. I mean, he sent, thousands and thousands of cattails, different grasses, pine cones, all that stuff year round. Something every month could be collected by the Piney families, which helped them live off the grid and not have a typical 9-to-5 job because they were able to do these other jobs. And they were able to make enough money in this market that did not pay taxes. They were able to, that distinction is a clear distinction that you could not have that industry today because of taxes and how we are very strict at paying taxes for things. Everything that they handled was under the table. So all those plants and things that they collected, though, yes, John Richardson died in the 1990s and the industry kind of died with him, but there were a lot of other factors that I detail in the book about what were the other driving factors that drove us Americans away from decorating from dried goods. Plastic was invented and people started making plastic flowers. And all of a sudden you had plastic flowers being decorated at home because you could wash the bouquet and it would look like brand new, right? So trends were going and coming. There was that. And then you could get cattails from Italy cheaper than you could get from the Pineys in South Jersey. So then you had price competition. But still, they were able to get by and do that industry all the way into the 1990s when John passed away. But you think about it though, we've always loved to decorate our homes, and we even decorate ourselves with plants that are from around us that we know. It's a natural industry that today, Martha Stewart in 2019 was talking about bringing back dry flower bouquets, and she was I saw different shows. It was very trending since 2019 talking about the dry flower industry. Because why? Because if you go pick a bouquet from the woods today and it's going to stick around for 10, 15, 20 years, the environmental footprint of that bouquet is nothing compared to the plastic silk flowers that you got from China, or the grapevine wreath that you bought at the local craft store that is also from China. Think about bringing a grapevine wreath from China and the supply chain to bring it all the way over here into a retail market when you could have got the same grapevine wreath that's a renewable resource from a local farm, from a Piney family that knew where to go to collect it, what time of year, and how to make it a craft that people could then decorate.
Thank you for elaborating.
Yep.
Kathleen has a question about a village. She was wondering what village was known for charcoal. Was there one in the Pines?
So charcoaling, so for people, everybody that knows, so charcoaling, well, what is charcoaling, right? So charcoal is an easy way to get a fire going in your home. So charcoal has fueled homes and warmth for families, but it also was a great item for those industries that needed those boilers and those furnaces that high. They needed that charcoal to keep that fire so high in order to then do a bog iron. Keep those furnaces going, they used charcoal. So they took local trees and they actually would the formation, and Ted Gordon has a great pamphlet, mini book out about the actual steps of the last charcoaler, a gentleman, African American from Ocean County. But they basically took pine trees, trees that were in the area, and they would make it look like a little igloo triangle shaped structure, and they would then pile the trees up, and then they would close off all the holes with the local turf. So the turf being the top of the grass that's growing in the area, they would dig that up, and then they would, put it all the way around to make sure no air is coming out of it. And then they would light the thing on the bottom, and they would monitor that. And when they're monitoring it, as in, they don't want the whole thing just to simply shoot up in a big flame and it's so hot that everything burns to nothing. They want to burn it from in so that the bottom parts, when it's finally done, is the remaining part of it is charcoal. That's how they made charcoal. But that was done all throughout the Pine Barrens. There wasn't a certain village, to my knowledge, that was just specifically about that. Collier's Mills was one location. They talk about Colliers are the ones that monitored that charcoaling process, right? So did Collier's Mills get named after that, or did it get named after a gentleman that was named Colliers? There's still debate on that. But Collier's Mills had them. There was locations in Wharton State Forest that had them that are documented. But I think anybody where there was an area and the land was open, Pineys are very to me. So the other thing is they're very independent people, right? We kind of figured that out. They live close to the land and they don't need to be by civilization. They survive on their own, and they're not against nature, but they're with nature. But they also they're very industrious as far as there's a resource around that they can make money off of. They took advantage of that, whether it been huckleberries or been pine trees that they cut and then turned into charcoal, and then they would take that to different places to whoever was buying. I hope that answer that.
I think so. Kathleen has a question about where would you be able to buy a piney craft nowadays?
So that's a great question. Because the Pineys aren't all gone, right? So the knowledge is still there. So when I talk about the Richardson calendar and 101 items, right? One of the items I mentioned in the slide was I used some words that were Piney vernacular. Like when I say hog huck, if I talk to my botanist friends, hey, did you see that hog huck over there? It looks great. It's right, perfect time to cut it. They don't know what I'm talking about. They just look at me like, you're crazy. What's hog huck? But if I talk to another Piney who is part of that industry, they know hog huck and they know why it's such a great item because they made a lot of money off of it. So hog huck is a Piney vernacular, right? And there's other words. Pine cones, everybody knows, is a pine cone, but certain words, elk's horn is a type of a gold crest, is a real common name, but Pineys call it elk horn. So the question was where you would get one today, right? There's still florists who actually, a florist recently, and I won't name names, but contacted me and said, you were talking about cattails, and I would love to use them in my floral arrangements. How do I get some? And my answer was, well, the cattails that were in Lower Bank in the South Jersey, a lot of them actually disappeared because of evasive pressure. So those Phragmites took over those marshes and the cattails are no longer there. 2, I could get you some, but again, that's not something I do. And 3, if I try to get you some on any state property or county property, I can be fined, ticketed, and my vehicle can be impounded. There's so many laws on the book now about that. That was another trigger to why the Pineys don't do those piney crafts no more, because it became the Pine Barrens was protected for a reason. And if they were in there getting things, it went against the conservation effort. So you can still go to craft markets and find a florist. maybe somebody is still living in the Pine Barrens and they're considered themselves to be Pineys and they remember. I always have on me, if I go to events or something, I'll have some kind of piney craft that I think people should still be using. Like foxtails is another plant that I love seeing. I have them in vases and I try to sell them at markets and stuff like that. Grapevine wreaths, lots of people make grapevine wreaths today. They're not all Pineys, but that's another piney item that people are still selling today. You just got to go to those craft vendor vessels and stuff like that.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because you compare Pineys often to the American Indians in the area. And then also with your book title, The Lost Piney Culture, you mentioned a lot about conservation efforts and how that has affected people of the Pine Barrens. Would you say that the culture exists in different ways now? When you mentioned the lost piney culture, how has it evolved, I guess? And
so it's a very deep question. A long answer, I'll try to make short. So 1955, remember we mentioned, speaking earlier about John Richardson, in 1955, he sold the racetrack, right? And America was experiencing the greatest rebound of the stock market and the economies were going through the roof prior to the Great Depression, right? 1955 is also when the state purchased Wharton State Forest. Previous to that, it went up for vote and the people of South Jersey voted it down. The people in North Jersey voted earlier on, before 1955, that yes, the state should purchase the Wharton Estate. The Wharton Estate was from Joseph Wharton, who purchased the land really to turn it into a water transfer to Philadelphia, a business venture for him. But early on, the state wanted to say you can't do that. And then they wanted to purchase the estate from after Joseph Wharton passed away from his kin. And South Jersey overwhelmingly voted no. That's a fact. North Jersey voted yes, sounds like a good thing. We need parks and stuff like that, and they were all for it. But if you think about the impact that big fence around the 1.1 million acres, there's 56 municipalities within 1.1 million acres, the most unique park in the nation, because it's not just a park, it's 56 towns with thousands and thousands of people living in those towns. And when you put the fence around there and you told them that they can't do certain things with their property, like their property values went from, I'm going to sell this land and retire and move to Florida because I have a nice nest egg, to I can't sell this land for even a tenth of the price of what I thought I was going to sell it for, and now I can't go nowhere. So that created a whole lot of animosity of the people that live in the Pine Barrens. It's hard. I'm a tree hugger, and I'll claim to be a tree hugger, but I'm a piney too. And I understand the feelings that people have about the land and what people tell them from outside that they can't do with their own land. But at the same time, if we left it up to development with everything, it becomes that, like the Mount Holly Fairgrounds, paid paradise. We'd have a jet port more than likely if it wasn't for John McPhee's book, The Pine Barrens, really rallying people to the conservation of the area. But the locals did not want that. So it's really impacted their lives personally, where somebody from Rahway wants it to be a Wharton State Forest. It's not impacting them at all, other than now I have a new place that I can go to and I can vacation at. I can go enjoy the rivers and that. But the people that live there, now their livelihoods are really impacted. And the Pineys, the traditional Pineys that most people say, or people that pulled pine cones, made those grapevine wreaths, cut cattails, all that was done in Wharton State Forest. It was done in Batstow. It was done down on the plains in Warren Grove. All those areas now, once they became that big fence around them, they're all off limits. So the Pineys still, the ones that I've interviewed that still are alive today, they still would do what they did, but they would do it knowing that they were breaking the law. So they became piney outlaws. And they were just doing something that they were traditionally taught. I mean, it's like telling a baker, your great grandparents were bakers and your grandmother was a baker, and now your father's a baker, and now the business is going to be, you're going to be a baker. Oh, wait, you can't be a baker no more. But that's the only thing I know. So those people that were doing that Piney Crafts, they were forced. It's almost like the assimilation of the Native Americans. They were forced to learn something new and move out of the areas that they traditionally knew what that tacit knowledge that they had about the land. They were forced to then transition into the 40-hour work week. They got jobs with the local county. They got jobs with the local state forest. They moved out away from the woods, and the money was obviously a lot better. So was the transition very difficult? It was difficult for some, and then some enjoyed the fact that they were getting better livelihoods from the new jobs that 40-hour work week came with. So it's a very complex question to answer.
You did a very wonderful job, and your book does a wonderful job of really giving a full look at people who live in the area.
Right.
So I really appreciate it. Olga has a question. Is there a museum of Piney crafts, culture, and history? And if not, maybe you can think about creating one.
So Olga, you are like my #1 fan tonight. And you think just like me. I have several goals for the book. And it's not for Olga or Kim Ha to purchase the book. That's not the goal at all. The goal is to educate people at the highest level in New Jersey to actually say we need a Piney museum. And my wife will agree that we need one sooner than later, because I've been slowly, like that 1913 tune. Let me see if I can show it to you. So this thing, see how big it is? That's the month of June in newspapers from 1913 for Boston Transcript. This is going to be open to the page that people can read, but it needs to be under glass in a museum so people can walk in there and read for themselves what the New Jersey governor said about the people of South Jersey. So I have items that I've been collecting that are to me artifacts of the Pineys, the people that Bill Wasowicz, he's a legend amongst Pineys and amongst the news, who always like to write about him being the last Piney. I have things that he's created that I have then preserved, and they're sitting on my porch in containers waiting for a Piney museum. I definitely think there should be one. So the book's goal is to really get enough media outlet or good karma, whatever it is, to really raise it to the governor's level to say this is something that's been overlooked for way too long. We at the highest level, at my position as governor, we really did the people in South Jersey wrong in 1913, 1914. And throughout the years, it still echoes and they still feel it. This would just be one step by correcting that wrong, by establishing a museum, I would like to hear an official apology from the sitting governor, whoever it is, this year, next year, whatever it is, to say they apologize for a sitting governor, Governor Fielder at the time, using his position to nationally tell the nation and to make an entire subset of the New Jersey population embarrassed to be who they were in the Pine Barrens by saying that they were all degenerates and such and such and such and such. So that's a great question. I'm pretty young. It depends. My kids say I'm old, right? But I'm only 48, I think. I got another 50 years to continue to beat this. This is something that's one of my #1 purposes. So to have a museum.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us tonight, William. And sure. If you haven't read William's book, New Jersey's Lost Piney Culture, I highly recommend it. It's very beautifully written too. I was drawn to the stories, and because you have some interesting stories, anecdotes in it as well as a lot of information about the people. And we have 6 copies. Yes.
Where else can you hear somebody talk about the book Outsiders? The book Outsiders by Mr. I always mix his name up, Hinton.
Yes, that's right.
Where else can you hear an author talk about, compare the people of South Jersey, the Pineys, to the Outsiders, which to me was a stroke of brilliance on my part. But I love it really brings it home to people. Everybody knows the Outsiders, right?
Yeah.
Patrick Swayze and them guys. But go ahead, we got books to give away.
Oh, yes, we do.
Thank you, Pennington, for doing that.
Oh, well,
Appreciate that.
thank you for donating these copies, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Yes,
It
ma'am.
was wonderful having you, and I look forward to hearing more about your future endeavors, and perhaps we can collaborate again for your future
Yes, ma'am.
books. So, all right, good night, everyone. Until the next time on Zoom, or you can come to the Pennington Public Library Tuesday through Thursdays between 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. To see us in person. All right, farewell, good
Get up
night.
and read.